Okay, good morning, everybody. Good morning and welcome to Coffee with a Curator. We are thrilled to have all of you here. It was a wonderful article in the St. Pete Times, which I'm sure many of you got to see. We are so thrilled. We are so thrilled about it. We're very happy to have all of you with us. If this is your first... Can you hear me now? Okay. I do not want to be too loud, but I am excited to have all of you with us. It's going to be a great talk today. Couple really quick things. First off, we want to thank Cafe Gala for providing the coffee. So we are always in their debt. Thrilled to have them with us. And we want to thank our two sponsors, AARP and the City of St. Petersburg, who have been providing the opportunity for us to have programs like this. But let me tell you a little bit about our speaker today. So we are very pleased to have Josh Frank with us, who wrote the book, Giraffes on Horseback Salad. Over the last decade, he's worked with some of the most interesting and innovative musicians, filmmakers, producers, and artists in the industry. He's worked with the frontman, Black Francis from the Pixies. He has done some work with post-surreal filmmaker David Lynch, and he's also worked with Harold Ramis, filmmaker. He's penned numerous plays, including the adaptation of Werner Herzog's Stozik. He's done stage musicals, including the Jonathan Richman musical. He has done adaptations, including Mark Vonnegut's The Eden Express, and he also has done a 3D CGI film feature working with puppets. So a lot of diversity there. He's the author of 3 books, including Fool the World, the oral history of the band The Pixies. He has also, right now, working on his 3rd book with the frontman for the Pixies, with Black Francis, called The Good Inn. In his spare time, he builds, owns, and operates the Blue Starlight Mini Urban Drive-In Movie Theater in Austin, Texas. Thus the t-shirt that you will see momentarily. It is the first mini urban drive-in movie theater in the world. Sounds super cool, read a lot about it. And he spent the last 5 years working on the project he's going to be sharing with us now. So please join me in welcoming. Oh, and real quick, just before that, there is going to be a book signing following the talk, which hopefully all of you will take advantage of. If you do not have your book yet, please purchase your book prior to having it signed. That's very, very important. So we trust you will do the right thing. And with that, let's see, let's go to slideshow, and I will step aside. Please join me in welcoming Josh Frank.
Thank you. Hey, everyone, this is so exciting. Thank you so much for having me here today. When I heard this was called Coffee with a Curator, I kind of imagined a small coffee table, curator, me, a couple people. So I didn't really prepare anything, so I'm just kidding. And I didn't get my coffee. No, I've got tea, and you'll also have to excuse my voice is about 2 octaves lower, 1 octave lower today, because I've got a little something going on, but we'll make it through. So yes, so this is like an incredible homecoming, I guess you could say, because I've been working sort of, in this little room, 300 square feet with a computer for the last 6 years writing this thing. And today, coming to the Dali Museum to talk about what I did is really exciting. I always kind of imagined in my head as I was writing in this sort of, purgatory world that one day I would come and do this, and I was really scared about the idea because it's like, I hope that by the time I'm done with this, I'll know enough about Salvador Dali not to make any mistakes, because eventually I'm going to come somewhere where people actually know what they're talking about, and that's where I am today. So if I pause directly before an important date or piece of information, it's me making sure in my head that I've got it right. So I spent the last 6 years of my life searching for my white whale, which was some great mysterious lost movie involving people that inspired me to become an artist and do really what I've been doing for the last 20 years. About 6 years ago, when I was finishing my 3rd book, which was sort of a lost history, I realized that, I realized that that was my thing. I'm really into sort of peeling the top layers of historical pop culture off and seeing what's directly below them in order to find stories that haven't been told. Because most of the stories that we hear are sort of rehashings of the same story, because a certain time period and a certain person is picked as the sort of epitome of that time period or of that event, and that is the story that is retold again and again. And I discovered when I was, sort of searching for different things to write about over the years that there's a lot of stories underneath those stories, and that they open up these amazing wormholes to completely different worlds, and I find that really fascinating. And I grew up a huge Marx Brothers fan. I started super early. I was like 8 years old, and the reason I discovered it was because I grew up in Houston, Texas, and it was in the very beginning of Nick at Night. Nick at Night? Huh? Nick at Night? Not the crappy ones that came in the, in the 90s and 2000s when they stopped showing the first, year of Nick at Night and they went into like 80s and 90s shows. I'm talking vintage Nick at Night where they showed Donna Reed and Mr. Ed. I was 8 years old and I was watching black and white TV. And I was the opposite of everyone else. Everyone was like, this isn't in color. I was like, when I saw something in color, I'd be like, this isn't in black and white. So, late at night, I'd watch Nick at Night. I'd sneak downstairs. And for some reason, the late night TV around 1986, 1987, they were showing a lot of classic movies. And they would show Marx Brothers movies weekly. And so I would sneak downstairs and I would watch Nick at Night and Marx Brothers movies, and I just became really into the Marx Brothers. And I would take my parents' VHS tapes, which they weren't happy about because I would record over whatever they did, and I would scratch out, The Godfather, and I would write in Marx movie, Night at the Opera, tape 22. And I still have some of them. My wife won't let me throw them away. She hates me. So I would watch these movies, and I watched them so many times that not only did I memorize the words, but I memorized the commercials. And there were certain commercials that were on every time I watched it. And so, for instance, mattress discount furniture saves you money. That's in my head forever. And I even remember the woman's voice, because back then TV movies was the way you watched movies on TV. And so they'd actually spend money on the opening and closing of the movie. So there was this woman, and she would say, tonight's $1 million movie is the Marx Brothers in monkey business. And she said it just like that, stuck in my head. So grew up on the Marx Brothers, and then when I went into high school and I got into a rock band, of course I discovered Salvador Dali, because, rock and roll and being cool and hip, you had to know about Dali. And then I went to film school and I discovered that Dali made movies. And that was when I was first introduced to his shorts. And so fast forward to, 20 years later, I write books, and part of what I've always done with my books is there's always some cinematic element to them. I went to film school, and I think cinematically, and it always bummed me out that you needed like dozens and dozens, sometimes hundreds of people to make a movie. You needed and a lot of money. So fresh out of college, I wanted to make my movies, but I didn't have a lot of people and I didn't have a lot of money. And so I started experimenting with how do you present movie ideas in a way other than making some big budget movie. And so I started a theater company that was the idea of creating cinematic theater. And that led to the Werner Herzog thing, where I actually, at age 23, he wasn't an American big name yet at the time. The only reason I knew about him was from film school. There wasn't really a lot of internet in the early 90s. So I cold called Werner Herzog's production company in Germany to get permission to stage my favorite weird movie of his that no one had heard of. And I got his brother on the phone, because it was this like small production company. And his brother said that he'd asked Werner. And about a month later, I'm woken up in Austin, Texas by my roommate yelling, "Dude, it's 7 in the morning and there's this angry German guy on the phone for you." So I picked the phone up, and it's Werner Herzog. And he says, "What do you want with my film?" And I told him I wanted to stage it, and he said, "That is a very strange idea. I think it'll be horrible, but you can see I'm not even trying to do the German accent. But go ahead." And that was really the beginning of everything for me, because literally everything from the phone call with Werner Herzog led to everything I've been able to do since. So this Dali Marx book only exists because of Werner Herzog, actually. Because when I went to write my first book, which was, I wanted to be about the Pixies, again, the Pixies invented alternative rock, but in the history books, Nirvana is the band that gets all the front page coverage. But in actuality, the Pixies were before Nirvana. If you want to go really deep, Husker Du, who I'm sure none of you have heard about, hey, 3, nice. Husker Du is even deeper than the Pixies. But the point being, there's these different layers of history. So the only reason Black Francis from the Pixies let me write the book was because he heard that Werner Herzog let me do something. And that's when I realized that you can get anything done as long as you find out who the person you want to do something on, who his person is that you have to be able to do something with, for that guy to be like, well, if that guy let you do it. And that's really, so that's how I got the Pixies book. And so my books have always been sort of, well, if I could make a movie about these guys, how could I do that as a book? Because I was able to do books. I got an agent somehow, and probably because of Werner Herzog. And all these other things came into place. So books became my medium for telling my cinematic stories. When it came time to find my fourth book, When it came time to do my fourth book idea, I was really at this point into this idea of lost movies that had not been made for one reason or another. And again, it goes into my whole thing about these lost histories and digging beneath the surface for things that have been missed that deserve a shot. Screenplays are the ultimate lost medium of history. It's a huge tragedy because it's like almost every other artistic movement can have its day in the sun even if it doesn't get funding. A play can be produced for $10 if you don't get $100,000 for your big production. A painting can be painted without someone else saying you can do that. You can write an essay. You can get something of yours out there. But a movie's hard. Even like big name people can't get certain movies made. And what I find really frustrating is that they spend the time writing the script. They write 120, 150 pages of a beautiful story. And if someone doesn't give hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to make it happen, the script just gets, it's nothing. It's gone. I find that shocking. If you think about how many non-famous people have written great scripts, that alone, and then you think of all the famous people that have movies that they wanted to make, that's art, right, too. And I've written screenplays, some of which have turned into my book ideas. Some I've done either nothing with, or I turned them into plays. That was the whole thing when I started my theater company. That's a way you can get lost movies out into the world. So I started developing this really specific idea of maybe for my next book, I'll take one of these great lost movie ideas and I'll make it. Let's see if we could do that. Again, because it's part of this whole passion for taking lost stories. This was sort of the ultimate challenge. So I started scouring through all the online lists of movies, the greatest movies never made, of which, this is 5 or 6 years ago, there were dozens of them. Now there's even more. You just type into Google great unmade movies. Every major magazine has a list. And some of the lists have actually different things. I was less interested in the lists that were like, you know, sort of more modern movies, like the superhero ones that weren't made. Those weren't very exciting but what was exciting was the ones that were written by these incredible auteurs of cinema that had spent years trying to make their vision happen, and it just didn't. Some of which there was art, there was entire scripts, some of which there was just sort of screen stories, but it was really fascinating to find out how many there were. Now within all of these, there was like 10 or 12 heavy hitters that were in all the lists. There was a couple from Coppola, Scorsese, Spielberg, Werner Herzog. He had one. Unfortunately, it wasn't a good fit for me because I did not think people would be into a 400-page epic graphic novel about the creation of Mexico. I really, really tried to make it work. It would have been a nice full circle, but in the end, and then of course there's, you know, Kubrick had his great Napoleon epic. Again, would have loved to do that. Don't think people would read a graphic novel about Napoleon. There were sort of specific parameters that I knew would work. It had to be a story that wasn't necessarily historical about a certain person. It had to be original. It had to be something that could work in different mediums. Napoleon would only work and be exciting in a pop culture sense if it was actually directed by Kubrick. And I'm no Kubrick. So there was all these, but also in a lot of these lists was this movie called Giraffes and Horseback Salad. Now I was a longtime Marx Brothers fan, but I even hadn't actually heard about this. So I was very intrigued about it. And I started sort of lightly looking into it, you know, like, because it just seemed too good to be true. It was too perfect. The Marx Brothers, Salvador Dali, they were going to make a movie. There was like one paragraph about it in each of these lists, and it just said it was about this protagonist called the Surrealist woman who was a fantastical being in a very reality-based world, and she could conjure her dreams and fantasies into reality as long as they were completely absurd, of course. And the Marx Brothers were her friends and helped her, and there was this other protagonist, Jimmy, who was a businessman, and he had his head in the clouds, but in a very sort of on-the-ground way. He sort of was the one who was creating all of this great infrastructure for America in the 30s, and so I keep hitting this microphone. And they fell in love, and I kind of saw that there was a story there, but then it went on to the midgets and Groucho hitting the midget on the head with a peanut, cracking it open, eating the peanut, and taking the crumbs and giving them to a monkey, and the monkey getting caught by Harpo. Groucho dancing the rumba with a woman, taking a spoon, spooning out her cheek, feeding it to the little monkey, who I don't know why they're being so tough on the monkey. And some crazy imagery, and it's like, okay, Dali. But, you know, I was like, so there was nothing else online about it, though. There really wasn't. There was nothing. There was just these little mentions here and there. So it made sense that up until this point, everyone had pretty much thought it was just this little silly idea. There wasn't really much else to it. But my delusions of grandeur would not let me give up on this, because immediately the idea was planted in my head. I could make the first new Marx Brothers movie in 60 years. I could bring the Marx Brothers and Dali together. I could write with Salvador Dali. You know, I'd wake up, you know, in these cold sweats at night, like, you know, this is it. But it, you know, I knew that it wouldn't work unless there was enough to work with. You know, I couldn't just invent it. That wouldn't be cool. There wouldn't be anything needed, but special about that, or real. There wouldn't be anything authentic about it. It would just be taking this little. So But I decided that my delusions of grandeur were worth me looking just a little bit further to see if there's a little bit more to work with. But before we move any further, I think we should introduce the characters. And I'm hoping I do this right, because no one showed me. Yes.
And now I want you to meet the sweetest little thing in the whole wide world. The gate swung open and a big Newton entered.
How do you do?
Say, buddy, could you help me out? I'd like to get a cup of coffee.
One of the most colorful people I know. Odd is another word that's been applied. But he's a man who once said about himself, the only difference between myself and a madman is that I am not mad. We'll see. Will you welcome, please, Salvador Dali? Something. I can't help noticing that you have an anteater with you, Mr. Dali.
Like a child, no, like at butterfly is, and like animals of any kind. Only it.
You only?
And violent
Uh-huh.
rhinoceros.
Right off.
Rhinoceros.
Am I alone in finding you somewhat difficult to follow in terms of what your theories are? Do people often misunderstand you or find you hard to...
But this is absolutely
it's
normal.
interesting, but
because
it's...
myself working my surrealism for 40 years, and today no understand nothing of my work.
No one understands your work today?
No, a lot of it is absolutely legitimate. A lot of people also no understand. Because if myself don't understand, the other will understand less.
If I had said hello, Dali, when you came out, would you have been offended? It's an old joke, I expect.
I'm never offended because all time the jokes create one tremendous indifference in my life. Tragical, and the jokes appear me tremendous quantity of vulgarity. In any jokes. Dali never jokes.
Do you like jokes?
No. For this choice, the only intelligent animals is the rhinoceros and the eat animals. Because the cats, the dogs is the more vulgar and catastrophic.
Yeah. Yeah, well.
This is the only way to travel, boys. The only way. I was going to bring along the wife and kiddies, but the grocer couldn't spare another barrel. I was going to bring my grandfather, but there's no room for his beard. Why don't you send for the old swine and let his beard come later? I sent for his beard. You did? Yeah, it's coming by hair mail.
Either he's dead or my watch is stopped.
Wait. Hey. Don't throw that. That's only for long distance. All right. What do you want? Would you like a suite on the third floor? No, I'll take a full lock in the basement. Well, you'll have to take that up with the commissary department. That's an entirely different proposition. I like it. You are. I'm sorry. The afternoon mail isn't in yet.
So there you have it. Those are our characters. So something to note, the Dali in that clip was obviously an older Dali. When he met Harpo, he was actually quite a young man. Harpo was significantly older than him. But I had to show that clip in particular because it's just such a perfect example of what I've been dealing with for the last 6 years. Which I'll get to, just as far as figuring it all out, what he meant. It's a great clip in that way because it's so him, and it's great, but if you actually need to understand what he's saying, it's a little more of a problem. You have to put some work into it. So yeah, Dali was a huge fan of the Marx Brothers. It was one of the first things I discovered in my research. He viewed them as the embodiment of Surrealism in the world, and he thought Harpo was sort of the great model of Surrealism in its most raw human form. He adored Harpo. As Groucho was quoted as saying, Dali loved Harpo, but in a nice way. So yeah, so he saw their movies and was a huge fan of theirs. And Dali also made movies quite different from the Marx Brothers movies. The greatest example is this one right here. Don't worry, it's edited for content, because I brought my son to one of these. So one thing I want you to notice in this, because I'll be talking about it, is when I went back and watched some of his early films, I was really impressed and excited by the realization that he was really funny in his imagery. You'll notice there's some disturbing stuff happening, but then this guy picks up these ropes and starts walking across. Is he trying to impress her? Is he trying to express his frustration? I don't know, but it's pretty funny because, and look, he's pulling pianos, and then it cuts to something grotesque. Funny, really funny, right? He's pulling pilgrims or something, and they're like, what's going on? And then there's the horse that's all bloody. So comedy is right next to the grotesque. Comedy is right next to the silly. And so I think this is when you really look at it that way, this is a great example of his sense of humor, his sense of surreal humor. See, back to the grotesque. Oh, he also did this little thing. You might have heard of this. Now, fun fact, originally, the Marx Brothers were actually in this picture. And you might not have known that, but when he went to put it up in the museum asked him to take the Marx Brothers out of the picture. No, I'm just kidding. None of that is true. They walked out all by themselves. They didn't have to be asked. So Harpo and Salvador Dali. When Harpo was on a press tour for Night at the Opera in Europe, Dali heard that he was going to be coming through Paris, where Dali was at the time, 1936. So Dali went to this party because he had heard Harpo was going to be there. And they met, and neither of them could speak the other's language. So the story I heard from Harpo's son, as told to him by his mother, Susan, Harpo's wife, they just communicated with their eyes and smiled. And they seemed to, I guess they hit it off splendidly that way, because after the party they kept in touch and they became pen pals. And Dali sent Harpo a Surrealist harp as a Christmas present, 1936. It was a full-size harp. The strings were replaced with barbed wire. The tuning pitches were spoons and forks. It was completely wrapped in cellophane. Harpo responded with a thank you letter and a picture of himself standing in front of the harp with bandages on his hands, smiling. But he also wrote, please come to America and paint, and I'd love to be painted by you, and as long as I can paint you as well. Now, what was really exciting about this, well, actually finding the letter, was I was starting to find some actual history I could base this story on that I could use in some sort of biographical content, which I knew would be useful since it seemed that the movie part, that I would need to flesh out of the story, at this point I didn't really have much to go with. But there was something here I could tell from sort of digging in a little to this research. The other really cool thing is that I discovered in my research is that when Harpo said, I'd like to paint you too, he wasn't joking or being silly. It turns out Harpo painted. How many people knew Harpo kind of painted? No, not a lot, but I see there's 4 or 5. You guys are awesome because it's really hard to find that out. But he actually was into painting, and this was like a big find because it really also told a lot more about why Harpo would be so enamored with the fact that Dali was a fan of his. Like he was, humbled that Dali liked what he did, and was impressed by him. But Harpo was impressed with Dali and was proud that Dali was interested in him because he was trying to be, not like a professional painter, but he was trying to become a painter on the side. It was a secondary passion. More on that in a minute. But in the meantime, so they met at this party, and this is an image from the book depicting that. So this is how part of the book became the biographical part. There's Harpo with the barbed wire harp. You see he's got bandages on, and there's a cellophane wrapping on the bottom. Oh, there's the picture he sent to Dali. And this is the actual telegram that he sent. Saying, come and paint me if you like. So yeah, in the beginning of 1937, Dali went to Harpo's house in California and painted him, and Harpo painted Dali as well. And this is one of the more famous images that Dali did of Harpo. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful, you see the crayfish or whatever on the top? So it was at this time that Dali was in California that he came up with the idea of Giraffes on Horseback Salad, at least the version with the Marx Brothers. Originally, he had a movie idea that he was going to call The Surrealist Woman. When he was in California, though, his own sort of idea of becoming the greatest next big thing in Hollywood and bringing surrealism to Hollywood, and this realization that Hollywood was this perfect billboard for the flag of surrealism, and that he could make this Marx Brothers movie that would be his entry into it. I mean, he had all these huge ideas, and it's something that I really related to, and I thought was really endearing. Because normally when you hear about Dali, you think of more of an Andy Warhol type that's really this is sort of one-note person that's not, doesn't have necessarily a lot of deep emotional layers or whatnot. But this was an artist, a struggling artist. He was famous, but from a certain perspective, from an outside perspective. But for him, it appeared at the end of 36, beginning of 37, he was really struggling to sort of figure out what's next, and more importantly, is there something next? Is this as far as I go? Is this as far as I've gotten? I started reading a lot of his biography stuff in order to fill in some of the things that I needed in order to make the whole project work. And I found that, this was a tender time for him, it seemed. And connecting with Harpo was sort of this medicine, He was a refugee from his own country. He had been kicked out of his own surrealist movement. He was afloat. And he was in California, completely different world from before, and he was hanging out with Harpo. It's kind of perfect, actually. So this was the world where Giraffes on Horseback Salad came from. So the biographical stuff was coming along, but at the same time, I was on a hunt for more actual story for Giraffes on Horseback Salad. At this point, I had learned that he had written it during this time period, but what had he written? Had he only written those 2 paragraphs, or was there more to it? If there wasn't more to it, I didn't have a book. I just had a really great story I could tell. Here. But not even though. I mean, there's only so much about that part. What really activates it is what comes next. But before we talk about what comes next, Harpo the painter. So this is my favorite part when I talk because I'm presenting something. This frickin' microphone. I'm presenting something that people haven't seen before. It's really cool. So during my research, when the book actually was happening and I was writing it, I had the honor of being able to go meet Harpo's son, Bill Marx. If anyone knows about Bill Marx, he is an incredible person, incredible human, incredible artist. He lives in Rancho Mirage, California, retired, and he every Monday night he still plays piano at this little piano bar cabaret. And if you're ever in California and you can arrange it to where you could go to Rancho Mirage on a Monday night and see him play, I highly recommend it. It's an incredible thing to experience that not a lot of people get to. Just by chance, I was there at the right time, the right week, and I was able to see him play, Harpo's son play, and it was incredible. He invited me back to his house, and going into Harpo Marx's son's house, by the way, Harpo lived in Rancho Mirage in retirement as well. Most of the Marx Brothers did. So this is really Marx Brothers, ground zero here. And so I go into his house and I'm so excited. Oh, I'm going to see all this great memorabilia. Well, I was quite disappointed. There really wasn't any memorabilia. The place was just full of all these paintings. And I'm walking around. I mean, there's like dozens and dozens. I'm like, who did all these paintings? There's all these paintings. My dad. I found myself standing in an entire house full of Harpo's paintings. And it was breathtaking. Harpo painted. He was really trying to, he was really trying to, learn the craft. And so he did all these different kinds, a lot of landscapes. These are all taken from pictures at Harpo's son's house because none of these are online or, available to see. So he did these really cool paintings, many of which were really trying. This one, though, this was the really nutso one. Look at this. Look, there's a crazy screaming tree. There's a cat on a fence. There's these guys with birds on their heads. There's a sheep on a tree. There's a turtle flying. There's this. This is his most surreal one for sure, and I love this one. Okay, this needs some explaining. So this is the bathroom of Harpo's son, and when I walked in, I saw the picture of Harpo overlooking the toilet, and so I go out into the main room and I say, "Hey, you have a picture of Harpo just on top of your toilet?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, we have that in all the bathrooms in the house." So he showed me. It was true. There was 3 other bathrooms, and in each one there was Harpo. I was like, "Hey, why is Harpo?" I noticed that you don't have pictures of Harpo really anywhere else in the house but over the toilets. He's like, "Well, yeah, it just seemed like Harpo should see who pees in our house. It just seemed like a good symmetry." It turns out, if you're a real Marx Brothers fan, you have a picture of Harpo on top of your toilet. It's true, because I then went to the Marx Brothers estate, head guy of the Marx Brothers estate's house a couple days later, who represents the Harpo estate and made this book possible. He too had Harpo over his toilet. So that's just a little side note, though. No, all different, but all with Harpo playing the harp over the toilet. So, so the biggest thing that I needed to do was find more material. And I reached out to the Dali Foundation in Spain, and I said, is there anything other than these little paragraphs I'm finding online about Dali's Lost Marx Brothers movie? And they said, well, yes, sort of, there is. There was a volume of film, of his film writing that is currently out of print, but there is a small part in there about Giraffes and Horseback Salad, which was the movie he wanted to make with the Marx Brothers. And I said, great, where can I get a copy? He said, well, it's out of print. The good news is, though, we have a couple copies here, but there's bad news, too. I was like, well, what's the bad news? It's in Portuguese. So I thought, well, Portuguese, okay, I'll figure it out. Send me a copy, please. They sent me a copy. So as I'm waiting for the copy to come, I have it all figured out. I'll just go through every page and I'll look for the word Harpo or the word Marx, because those won't be in a different language. And when I find them, I'll have those pages translated. So the 800-page volume arrives, and 3 months later, on page 824, there's the word Harpo. There's about 6 pages. So I copy the 6 pages, I go into Craigslist, I find someone that translates Portuguese, and I send them the pages, and next thing I know, I have 6 pages of story that I didn't have before. It was very exciting. It was stuff I'd never seen. It still didn't make a lot of sense, but it had more scenarios, it had more ideas for what was going to happen to these 2 protagonists, the Surrealist woman and Jimmy. And it went a little bit more into what the Marx Brothers' part was in this story. They were her confidants, her friends, and so this was exciting. So it's like, well, there's more to work with here, but it definitely wasn't enough to make the movie in some way. So I reached back out to them and I said, well, where did this material come from? Is there a place where there might be a little more of this, that this was pulled from? And they said, well, yes. There's a museum in Paris, which I am about to pronounce completely wrong, called the Pompidou. Is that all right? Hey! So that museum, I'm not going to try and say it again, that museum supposedly had more material. So I reached out to them, and I said, hey, you know, I got this stuff from the Dali Foundation, and I was wondering, they said it came from your museum. I was wondering if you had more. And they wrote back really nice and were like, well, yes, actually. We have a lot of Dali's handwritten notes, and we believe it came from those. And I said, well, I'd like to see them. And they said, well, you're welcome to come to our library and look at them. And I said, well, listen, I'm in Austin, Texas, and I'm poor. The $200 I just spent on this Portuguese translator, I know it's not your problem, but that kind of set me back a little bit. Is there any way you could just send me them to look at somehow? You know, when was the last time anyone asked to look at these particular pages I'm asking to look at? And they checked, and it had been about 40 years. So I guess it was a good day, because the woman agreed to send me, you know, protected PDF copies to look at. So it's very exciting. So a week later, I received an email from the museum, and there was 80 pages of handwritten notes. This was really exciting. But you know, in my head, I didn't want to get too excited, because it's like, maybe translated, this will really be like 2 pages, you know? I just didn't know. Luckily, I had a friend in France, in Paris, who I knew was a good translator. I'd worked with him before, and I reached out and asked him if he could translate these pages for me so I could see if there was, the material I needed for this crazy idea of adapting a lost Salvador Dali screen story into a graphic novel movie. He said, sure, happy to. So I sent them to him, and he wrote me back, and he said, okay, well, there's good news and bad news. The good news is I could translate this. The bad news is I'm going to have to translate it multiple times. And I was like, well, why? He's like, well, if you could read French, you would know that Dali's French is not regular French. It's Dali French. So I have to translate it from Dali French to regular French, and then from regular French to English. And I was like, okay, cool. I got $200. It's yours. So for $200, my friend did this 80-page multiple translation and got it to something that made some sense. And again, I really didn't know how many pages I was going to get, but he sent me back about 62 pages. So when I saw these 62 pages and I went through them, I realized there's enough material here that I could do something with. It was very exciting. This was like 3 years, by the way, into the 6-year process of making this book already. We're 3 years down. So he sent me it all, and that's when it was so exciting, because I have a history of adapting. I like adapting screenplays. I do. I like taking books or historical stories and turning them into screenplay format. So this was something I was comfortable with. So I immediately got to work on that, trying to see if there was something that I could create, at least to the point to get it in front of the foundation, both Dali and Marx, to present to see if they'd allow me to do this. I needed to show them what I was trying to do. So I took all these pages and I started creating the story around them. And there was enough material, but what was missing was certain important narrative story parts that really needed to be connected in order for the story to make sense. I found the missing pieces in Dali's own life. So I researched really 1936, 1937, what was he going through at that time? And this sort of tenderness, this feeling of loss, of insecurity, of fighting reality. And I took the real stuff that was going on and I inserted them into, because when I write something original, I'm writing from my perspective and what I'm going through at that time. You assume that Dali would probably be doing the same. He was telling part of his own story. And that's really what made this work, is putting all those pieces together and both his life and the lost film, and that's what turned Giraffes on Horseback Salad into an actual movie that I could then adapt into a graphic novel story. And that's why it made sense to have bookends of biographical stuff, because the lead characters in Giraffe on Horseback Salad are really, in many ways, Salvador Dali, going through this story of fighting against, this enemy of Surrealism. So I started putting it all together, and that's when I reached out to the Marx Brothers estate with my intent to get their permission and then get the Dali Foundation's permission to do this. The Marx Brothers estate hadn't allowed a new original piece of Marx Brothers work in a long, long time. I happened to reach them at the right moment. This gentleman named Robert Bader had taken over handling a lot of the business affairs, and they had just, for the first time, put together a structure for being able to deal with new projects like this. And he said to me, if you can get the Dali Foundation's approval, you have ours. He told me later, in front of an entire audience actually 2 weeks ago, that he called it the Dorothy Witch moment, because he's like, this guy came to me, he wanted to go back to Kansas. I said, go get the ruby slippers, kill the witch, come back to me and we'll talk. He didn't think I'd actually get the slippers. 3 months later, I had the slippers. I presented to the Dali Foundation, and they were intrigued too, because, and I think both of them, it was the same type of thing. They both were like, wow, we didn't think anything could be done with something like this, and this guy came up with something. So I think they really wanted to see where I'd go with it. And it was very exciting, because the whole idea of putting this together as a graphic novel was all about authenticity. I wanted it to be completely authentic in every way possible. I wanted Marx Brothers fans to buy it, not buy the book, like buy, well I do, but you know, buy it, like believe in it. And I wanted Dali fans to believe in it, and so that's, the whole process has been about really being authentic. And so once I had the approvals, I was the guy making the next Marx Brothers movie that was written by Salvador Dali, thus I would be able to write with Salvador Dali. And it was really cool. Again, it was a huge honor and something that I took very seriously, because they were giving me permission to take an idea of Dali's and finish it. And so that's what I've been doing for 6 years. And halfway through the process, when I had all my permissions, the next thing was actually making it. And the way that I made it was, he gave me some help to begin with, because he had done some original sketches, which are very famous now, that were supposed to be visions of his movie. These are some of the actual handwritten pages that were sent to me by the museum in France that I had translated. They're in the book as well. This is the actual MGM pitch that Dali and Harpo took in, that was written probably by some studio friend to help try and get it picked up by MGM. I discovered this late in the game, but Harpo's estate gave it to me. This is a great example of the translation. The top is Dali French, the middle is regular French, and the bottom is English for me. And then I took all of that, and that's another example of it. Those were the good old days. So yeah, and then I turned it into screenplay format. I basically took all of that and all the history, and this is a page from the actual screenplay I wrote that I then turned in to the estates to show them what I was doing. And then they partied like it was 1937 once they had their script done. Okay, so the next big thing I had to overcome was the Marx Brothers jokes. In all of Dali's pages of notes, he wrote a lot of little crazy Marx Brothers bits, but he knew he wasn't a Marx Brother, so whenever he knew there needed to be more, he wrote insert Marx Brothers mayhem here, basically. So when I wrote my screenplay, I did the same thing. I wrote some of the gags and jokes, but when I realized there needed to be more, I wrote insert Marx Brothers mayhem here. So that's when I reached out to my friend Black Francis and asked him, who's the most surreal comedian in the country? I need him to help me write Marx Brothers jokes. And he said Tim Heidecker from Tim and Eric. And Tim Heidecker agreed, and we put together a writer's room, and we put my script up on the screen with insert Marx Brothers mayhem here moments. And we wrote more Marx Brothers jokes. And that's how we got the Marx Brothers material to be authentic and something that, that Marx Brothers fans would approve of in this new Dali Marx Brothers movie. It was incredibly exciting. And then I needed an illustrator. This is the part that is the most wonderful and exciting. I went through 2 or 3 different illustrators over the 6 years. I tried a couple I used to help get my book deal, a couple I used to show examples of what I was going to do for the estates, but I hadn't found the right one yet. And when I thought I did, I got the book deal, then I lost that one, and then I lost the book deal, and then I thought it was dead. There's about 200 times I thought this was all dead. But about 4 years in, I finally found the right illustrator. I found this incredible website called Behance. Has anyone heard of this website? So if you ever need an illustrator or graphic designer, this is an incredible resource. What's amazing about it is artists from all over the world put their portfolios up on this website, and then you can search per country, city, town, type of art to find exactly who you're looking for and reach out to them. So I figured, well, this seems like a good place for me to find the most authentic illustrator I could work with. So I typed in Barcelona, Spain, surreal graphic illustrator, and boom, Manuela Pertega popped up with her portfolio, and it was incredible. It was perfect. It was exactly what I was looking for. I sent her an email, and I said, hey, my name's Josh. I live in Austin, Texas. I'm writing a graphic novel adaptation of a lost Dali Marx Brothers movie. It's going to be an incredible amount of work. You're probably going to have less time than you ever thought you would need for 250 to 300 pages, and you're going to get paid crap. Are you in? Luckily, I found the perfect person because not only was she the most incredible illustrator I'd ever seen, especially having to do with surrealism, but she was young. And you know, it was a huge opportunity. She had done work for like art magazines in Barcelona, but she hadn't had like a big opportunity like this. I promised her that you know, if it made her feel any better, I'd be making exactly as much as her, if not less. And she was in. And the greatest part was, that's Manuela, and this is the page I found of hers and her work. We didn't speak the same language. She barely spoke English, and I did not speak Spanish. So while we were writing it, we had to basically write with our eyes, just like Harpo and Dali. Sometimes, though, we would do little Skype sessions where I would talk and she would listen, but she would just nod her head. She doesn't actually understand what I'm saying, but we did it just to keep up appearances. We didn't want the publisher to not, I don't think they ever found out that we couldn't talk to each other. So these are some of her original sketches, and she worked on it. She was incredible. She created this 240-page illustrated graphic novel based on my screenplay in 12 months. I'm going to meet her for the first time, actually, next week in London when we do an event at Barbican. We have not met. Yeah. So she's incredible, and my goal is to make her incredibly famous someday. So yeah, found the illustrator, had the script, and we did it. We pulled it off. Me and Manuela and Tim, we all worked together to take this, at the time, obscure screen story that Dali, I sincerely believe he really wanted to make this movie. I really felt like he felt that this was going to be an important thing for Hollywood, an important thing for him, and his chance to work with the Marx Brothers. And you know what? I know how he feels, because I just had the chance to work with the Marx Brothers, and it was incredible. And a huge honor. And not only did I get to work with the Marx Brothers, but with Salvador Dali, and bring a lost layer of history back into the world. So I'm coming to the tail end of my journey with, there's so much more, but I wanted to tailor today to being as much about sort of the process of finding Dali's you know, little gems for his movie and figuring out how to make them a reality. But I would like to kind of end with a little music.
I've got to stay here. There's no reason why you folks shouldn't go out into the lobby till this thing blows over.
So 4 months before the book came out, I decided to give myself one more challenge, and that was to learn to play the harp. Why not? With the idea that I'd, you know, schlep a harp around to all of my book events and play it along with Harpo at these book events. Well, I actually did learn the harp. One song that I spent 4 months trying to get down at least good enough to do a sing-along and play live. It worked. I learned the harp, but within the process, I realized that taking a harp to every place I was going to go to would be a huge problem. So that didn't happen. But this was the song I learned. It's from Horse Feathers. It's one of my favorite moments because each of the Marx Brothers does a version of it. Everyone, sing along everybody, says I love you. The cop on the corner and the burglar too. The preacher in the pulpit and the man in the pew says I love you. Everyone, no matter who, the folks over 80 and the kid of 2, the captain and the sailor and the rest of the crew says I love you. There are only 8 little letters in this phrase you'll find, but they mean a lot more than all the other combined. Everyone, the whole world through, the king in the palace and the peasant too, the tiger in the jungle and the monk in the zoo says I love you. That was the best sing-along we've had in this whole tour. So I got to play with Harpo. No. Yes, but there's not enough time for me to add it here. It was so good, though. I'm sorry you didn't get to see it today. But I did learn the very final note of the song. Let's see. So I want to thank you all so much. This has been great. The only other thing I want to kind of mention to you is that about 4 months before the book was done, besides learning the harp, I reached out to an old friend of mine in Japan. He's a composer, and he happened to live in Japan and have a giant jazz band in Japan. Well, Dali had actually wanted the soundtrack. He wrote in his notes that he knew exactly what he wanted the soundtrack of his movie to be. He wanted it to be Cole Porter doing the soundtrack. So I reached out to my friend. I said, hey, buddy. So I got this book coming out. It's kind of a graphic novel adaptation of a movie. I want to do the soundtrack too, though, because I kind of want the whole picture, the whole thing. I want to get as much done as possible. So how would you like to write a whole soundtrack to a lost Marx Brothers Dali movie? You won't make any money. It's going to take you a lot of time. You have 4 months. Are you in? And he said yes. So in about 5 weeks, the soundtrack to Giraffes on Horseback Salad is coming out from a major record label that actually I happen to be able to get a meeting with through a mutual Marx Brothers friend. Lakeshore Records is putting it out as a full album, and it will be available in all its glory. There's 5 songs that I actually wrote in the book for the Marx Brothers and the lovers. Just, in every Marx Brothers movie there's a lover song, you're like trying to fast forward through it, which you couldn't do back then. So we wrote all the songs, and that will come out in 5 weeks as a further completion of trying to make Dali's lost movie a reality. Did you? Are you going to make the movie? If anyone knows any very wealthy producers that work in Hollywood, the rights are available, and my card is on the table. No, I mean, I really obviously hope that it gets made into a movie for many reasons. I think it would be a great movie. And my goal was to finish it as much as I personally could to show the world that it could be a great movie. And if all it is going to be is a movie in this form, I'm proud of it that way. But yes, I would love to sell the rights to the movie, and I'm sure the Dali estate would as well. So yes, soundtrack comes out in 5 weeks. I will be signing books. I also have original posters and t-shirts from Manuela, who designed them just for, like 150 just for my little book tour, so I got some of those too if you're interested. And my card is on this table and will be on the other table if you have further questions. And thank you so much. Thank you, Dali Museum.